to illustrate, in the period before the appearance of Buddhism, the proponents of the non-Buddhist teachings in India were not so bound up in their own views. But after the appearance of the Buddha, when they had listened to and observed the Buddhist teachings, they became aware of the shortcomings of their own doctrines. They then conceived the clever idea of appropriating Buddhist teachings and incorporating them into their own doctrines, and as a result they fell into even deeper error than before. These are examples of the errors known as appropriating Buddhism or plagiarizing Buddhism. The same thing occurred in the case of non-Buddhist scriptures in China. Before Buddhism was brought to China, Confucianism and Taoism were rather naive and childish affairs. But in the later Han, Buddhism was introduced to China and challenged the native doctrines. In time, as Buddhism became more popular, there were certain Buddhist priests who, because they had broken the precepts, were forced to return to secular life, or who elected to join forces with the native creeds. Through such men, Buddhist doctrines were stolen and incorporated into the Confucian and Taoist teachings. In Volume 5 of Great Concentration and Insight we read, "These days there are many devilish monks who break the precepts and return to lay life. Fearing that they will be punished for their action, they then go over to the side of the Taoists. Hoping to gain fame and profit, they speak extravagantly of the merits of Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, usurping Buddhist concepts and reading them into their erroneous scriptures. They twist what is lofty and force it into a mean context. They destroy what is exalted and drag it down among the base, striving to put the two on an equal level." On Great Concentration and Insight comments on this passage as follows: "Though they are monks, they destroy the teachings of Buddhism. Some break the precepts and return to lay life, as Wei Yuan-sung did. Then, as laymen, they work to destroy the teachings of Buddhism. Men of this kind steal and usurp the correct teachings of Buddhism and use them to supplement and bolster the erroneous writings." The passage on twisting what is lofty means that, adopting the outlook of the Taoists, they try to place Buddhism and Taoism on the same level, to make equals of the correct and the erroneous, though reason tells us that this could never be. Having once been followers of Buddhist teachings, they steal what is correct and use it to bolster what is incorrect. They twist the lofty 80,000 teachings of the 12 divisions of the Buddhist canon and force them into the mean context of Lao Tzu's 2 chapters and 5,000 words, using them to interpret the base and mistaken teachings of that text. This is what is meant by destroying what is exalted and dragging it down among the base. These comments should be carefully noted, for they explain the meaning of the foregoing description of events. The same sort of thing happened within Buddhism itself. Buddhism was introduced to China during the Young Pian era c. 58-75 of the later Han Dynasty, and in time established its supremacy over Confucian and Taoist teachings. But differences of opinion developed within Buddhism, resulting in the 3 schools of the South and 7 schools of the North, which sprang up here and there like so many orchids or chrysanthemums. In the time of the Sage and ensuing dynasties, however, the great teacher Chaitanya defeated these various schools and returned Buddhism once more to its primary objective of saving all living beings. Later, the teachings of the Dharma characteristics and true word schools were introduced from India, and the flower garland school also made its appearance. Among these schools, the Dharma characteristics school set itself up as an arch opponent of the Tiantai school, because their teachings are as contradictory to each other as fire is to water. However, when the Tripitaka master Xuanzang and the great teacher Tizia closely examined the works of Tiantai, they came to realize that the views of their own school were in error. Although they did not openly repudiate their own school, it appears that in their hearts they switched their allegiance to the Tiantai teachings. From the beginning, the Flower Garland and True Word schools were both provisional schools based upon provisional sutras. But the Tripitaka masters Shan Wu-wei and Chen Kangchai, who introduced the esoteric True Word teachings to China, usurped the Tiantai doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life and made it the core of the teachings of their school, adding the practice of mudras and mantras and convincing themselves that their teachings surpassed Tiantai's. As a result, students of Buddhism, unaware of the real facts, came to believe that the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life was to be found in the Mahavajrayana Sutra that had been brought from India. Similarly, in the time of the Flower Garland patriarch Ch Kuan, the Tiantai doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life was surreptitiously incorporated and used to interpret the passage in the Flower Garland Sutra that reads, "The mind is like a skilled painter." People were unaware that this was what had happened. In the case of our own country of Japan, the Flower Garland and the other schools that comprise the 6 schools of Nara were introduced to Japan before the Tiantai, or Tendai, and True Word schools. The Flower Garland, 3 treatises, and Dharma characteristic schools argued and contended, as inimical to one another as water and fire. When the great teacher Dingyo appeared in Japan, he not only exposed the errors of the 6 schools, but also made it clear that the True Word school had stolen the principles of the Lotus Sutra as expounded by Tiantai and made them the heart of the teachings of its own school. The great teacher Dingyo set aside the various tenets propounded by the leaders of the other schools and, solely in the light of the sutras, attacked their views. As a result, he was able to defeat 8 eminent priests of the 6 schools, then 12 priests, then 14, then over 300, as well as the great teacher Kobo. Soon there was not a single person in all of Japan who did not acknowledge allegiance to the Tenda school, and the great temples of Nara, Tsuji, and other temples throughout all the provinces became subordinate to the head temple of the Tenda school at Mount Hiei. The great teacher Dingyo also made it clear that the founders of the various other schools in China, by acknowledging allegiance to the doctrines of Tiantai, had escaped committing the error of slandering the correct teachings of Buddhism. Later, however, conditions in the world declined, and people became increasingly shallow in wisdom. They no longer studied or understood the profound doctrines of the Tenda school, and the other schools became more and more firmly attached to their own prejudiced views. Eventually, the 6 schools in the True Word school turned upon and attacked the Tenda school. The latter, growing ever weaker, in the end found that it was no match for the other schools. To aggravate the situation, absurd new schools such as Zen and Pure Land appeared and began attacking the Tenda school as well, and more of its lay supporters transferred their allegiance to these erroneous schools. In the end, even those priests of the Tenda school who were looked up to as men of eminent virtue all admitted defeat and lent their support to these schools. Not only Tenda but True Word and the 6 schools as well were forced to yield their lands and estates to these new misguided schools, and the correct teachings of the Lotus Sutra fell into oblivion. As a result, the Sun Goddess, the God Hachiman, the Mountain King of Mount Hiei, and the other great benevolent deities who guard the nation, no longer able to taste the flavor of the correct teaching, departed from the land. Demons came forward to take their place, and it became apparent that the nation was doomed.